Thank you everyone for coming out to Vegas Programmers. I really appreciate it. Are you here for the real estate thing?
No.
Okay, you're here for Vegas Programmers. Because she just said they're here for the real estate thing, and I just wanted to make sure you're in the right spot. All right. All right, so some new faces, some old faces, not age-wise, I mean just duration. And tonight we've got a very special guest. We've got Christopher Hoult, who came from all the way over the pond in the UK. So it's fantastic that he was awesome enough to reach out, and he was in town for a conference. He did not come here exclusively for us. Sorry, we're not that cool, but cool enough that he reached out and he was willing to give some of his time to throw out some topics. And we had a poll, and the number one that was voted was your API as a UI. So fantastic talk ahead of us on API development. And I'm super excited to have him speak. Before we get started, just a couple of things. Big shout out, obviously, to corporate co-working space. If you do need co-working space here in Las Vegas, it is the premier spot. I've worked out of here many a time. Fast internet, very quiet, great place to work, conducive for, and best of yet, coffee whenever you want, right? I think that's a requirement for any co-working space. And then also shout out Ryan for recording these all the time. It's, you know, I don't pay him. You can pay him, but he's outstanding. In fact, he did a little personal project for me, and that came out great. So thank you, Ryan. You rock. And we've got a couple of prizes to give away at the end of the meetup. So we're going to be giving away a 1-year JetBrains license for any IDE that they offer. They make the best IDEs out there. And then also we've got a Symphony Cast 1-month membership. They have a bunch of video tutorials on Symphony, but also JavaScript frameworks and things like that. And yeah, I think that covers pretty much everything. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it.
Hi there.
Hello.
Quick word of warning. If I suddenly shut down into suspension, I suspend, I've literally stepped off a plane. 10 hours, landed at 2:30, kind of feeling it. So 8-hour time difference. So if I shut down, just, give me a poke and I'll roll straight back up. So yeah, your API is a UI. Thank you for the intro, Josh. So who am I? I realize I'm in the way of some of this stuff, but look, all the things I'm going to read off the screen for you guys as well. I've been in commercial development for 20 years now, straight out of university, accidentally a web developer, and I've worked for some pretty cool things. Right now I'm running my own company for consulting and general SaaS development, helping scale-ups and startups mature internally, and just whatever they point me at, really. But previously I was at Data. We had Hillary's emails. If you want to talk about that, we'll go off camera. I was at DataSift. We were reading all your tweets and all your Facebook post comments and likes, but in a legit way and a privacy-focused way. Time Out magazine, if you've heard of that in other cities. I can't remember if there was one here or if there's one here, but looking after a global platform for that kind of stuff. Also, I am an improv comedian and actor, which basically just means that I show up somewhere, wing it, people laugh or don't, and then I leave again. It's great. The only thing you have to do is show up. So that's great. So, first off, hands up if you're a programmer. Sweet. Hands up if you do scripting languages. That's pretty much all of you. Sorry? Yeah. Hands up if you hate audience participation. Cool. So, this talk, your mileage may vary. I will be talking about services and APIs and all sorts, but because I live in a web world, I'm going to talk about web services and APIs from like a web service type thing, but this covers all sorts of principles that cover like your libraries instead. So while I might use vernacular that implies communicating across the interwebs, hopefully this is more general stuff there. I'm not going to go into any code. In fact, I'll probably talk really quickly and say things 3 times for each slide. And if you don't get it at that point, then I look like this, come up and ask me questions afterwards. But yeah, just given we're a nice kind of intimate venue, if you do have anything that you'd like to ask during, stick your hand up and we can do that. I'd prefer it if you're not just going to ask why my accent is weird. I'll tell you about that later if you really want. But yeah, just take from this what you will, and hopefully you get something out of this.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Go back one slide. Is that you?
No.
Without a beard? Oh, okay.
No, that's not me without a beard. I used to put up a slide of me without a beard, saying that I occasionally shave, but that's only ever for shows, and I haven't needed to do that for a play for a very long time. So this chin will remain a mystery for you all. So, what is a user interface? I think we all know that there, but effectively it is a place. A talk is not a talk unless we got a quote from Wikipedia, right? I've got 2, so this is a double talk, right? Yeah, it's basically generally where a human is interacting with a computer. So it is, web, whatever, something where humans are understanding rather than speaking really strict language. It's something that is understandable by us. And again, with an API, it's something like that, but understandable for a computer, effectively. What hopefully I'm talking about today is the places where those concepts overlap is really important to me, because I think if we're all programmers, or the majority of us are programmers, then we've probably done some integrations before, and when we've done integrations, we probably looked at API documentation or lack thereof, and we probably ripped all our hair out just trying to get to grips with why this thing that's been put in front of us to work on is so opaque and so anti-me. Why is this thing sent to test me? And hopefully I can do a bit of evangelizing for taking some care and some pride in what you do. But unfortunately, we need to talk about users first. We all have them. And if we don't, then, then you don't get paid. So users. The first thing we really want to think about when we're putting together an API, a bit of software, anything like that we're presenting to others is who are our users. I've just said, people like ourselves, developers, could just be your colleagues as well, so you're actually either friends or mortal enemies with them. Customers, the ones who actually pay for your work, and and the ones who have expectations as a result, because they pay, they're going to want to make sure it's up. They want to make sure that it works for them. Their customers, if you're building a platform, or if you're building a multi-tenant solution or something that's white labeled, anything like that, those customers that pay you direct might have customers paying them direct, and anytime you break something and it goes all the way downstream to their 100 customers, that gets amplified back up to you. So we really need to think about those. Applications, we're talking about APIs, so applications are our users. And this kind of weird space we're in at the moment, AI. I put it in quotes because I'm a bit hawkish on it. I won't go into too much detail on that, but I think hopefully one of the things I can just mention now, generative AI, the ones that are writing code for people, they're trying to be like humans. They're trying to produce results that mock what a human would do. And as a result, we still need to think about those AIs using our stuff as humans, right? In the same way that SEO is all about crafting your pages so that Google says, this looks good to a human, so it's better. You need to write your stuff for humans such that the tools that pretend to be humans know how to use it. Because at the moment, I'm an improviser, and it's my position that AIs are basically glorified improvisers. They take in stuff, they accept it as truth, and they spit out something that looks like it should work. A bit like some humans, I know, to be fair. But yeah, we just got to think. Whoa! For the camera, there was a finger pointed at a human. So yeah, while AI is such a hot topic, when we're covering this right now, we still need to think about the humans in that, and it will wrap that AI up. When you're putting stuff out there, when you're putting a library out there, when you're putting out a service, what does your API do? You can't, it's not Field of Dreams. You can't build it and they will come. You need to think about what the value proposition is. What are the real use cases? What are the problems you're trying to solve? You might be solving them for yourself and then sharing them out there, but even using yourself as a target user, thinking about why someone would use the thing that you're putting out there is really important. So laying out those user stories is incredibly important to just get those down in place. It's great if you're just yourself working on these things, but having this foundational documentation and this idea of where you're going with what you're putting out there is really important when you're bringing team members together to build stuff, or even if you've forgotten what you wrote 2 months ago and you need to know why you wrote it that way. Just having that foundation allows you to crystallize your ideas around there. And on top of that, actually write down how someone would go about using your API. How would they achieve that use case using the tools you've given them? Just by stepping through the process and saying, hey, they need to do 7 things to achieve this one thing, maybe I can shrink it down, starts to expose that thing to yourselves. And you can start developing that empathy and, hey, I don't want to be the guy who causes those colleagues to rip their hair out because I've written this horrific thing. And then finally, if you're putting something together for your customers, or if you just want to open source some software, having an elevator pitch is really important. Not necessarily the kind of thing that you go out and sell it, but having a succinct idea as to why someone should use your stuff and why yours is going to improve their lives is just going to be a hell of a lot easier for you to get some traction with people as you go through. Again, it's all about focusing you on that design and trying to meet those pieces that will allow you to be a bit more successful in putting this stuff forward. Along with that, you need to think about what can the users do. So it's not just what can it achieve, but what can they do with it, what can't they do with it, justify why you're sharing this in the first place. You probably don't want to just make everything open by default. And I don't necessarily mean just the authorization and authentication side of things, but think about why you are exposing this functionality in the way you are and sharing that with others. If you don't have that thought going forward, someone will go, oh, here's an endpoint, here's a library that I know I can use, I'll just build something with it. And then you turn around, if you don't know why you've put that out there and you change that up, you'll have some very real impact on people using their stuff. The same thing there is like, if you've been to a candy store as a kid, you have your dollar, or what, like $5 now, I guess. Go there, you have all these candies in front of you. Which one do you pick? That tyranny of choice. So, thank you. Tyranny of choice. Okay, I just thought it might work. So allowing that focus again, putting forward just the paths that you want them to go down rather than give them the whole candy store, give them the bits that will work for them and be useful for them. Also think about what they can't do. You might want to hold back some functionality, either because you need to protect your secret sauce, or because it's too dangerous, or you're relying on that internal functionality without necessarily putting it out to the world. And then once you've gone through those what can they do, what can't they do things, validate those against those user stories we've written earlier and against the goals that the user wants to do, so that you can understand that what you're putting out there meets those goals. And again, it's that kind of returning to that singular focus of design, of laying stuff out, is really important to kind of keep that focus and make sure you've got that consistency going through. When I first started talking about this concept of your API as a UI, I mentioned it to a friend, and he labeled it with something that I hadn't thought of, but API UX, API user experience. So there's a great website, apiux.com, and on there, like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have the API hierarchy of needs, and I think this is pretty neat. The very fundamental bit, though, which is, hopefully you can all see, usability at the bottom. That is the foundational piece of this hierarchy. If it's not usable, if you can't make use of it to do whatever the bit is, you're just going to ruin the foundations of what you put forward. And we'll go into this a bit more, but easy to set up and use. Functionality, does it do the thing we expect it to do? Does it fulfill the role that has actually been laid out for it? Reliability, does it continue to do that? It's great if it works once, but it's even better if it works 1,000 times. Proficiency, are we actually saving money, saving time, saving effort by using this API? Are we able to build new things on top of that? And that leads into the creativity. Can I create things with it that the developer of it, ourselves, didn't think they could do? That's the toughest one, but hopefully by focusing on usability and then working our way up, which we'll do in a bit, we can aim for that peak of the hierarchy. Yep.
And that thing, where would you put testability? Because that's usually a big thing that kind of.
Well, I mean,
and then we realize, how do we test to make sure it's still doing what we think it's actually doing?
so I mean, functionality and reliability are natural places to put testability. So I think I've got a little bit about testing later, but I think it's really important to keep coming back to testing what we're doing. Think about how do we make it testable. When we are testing things from a user's point of view, we're looking at integration, behavioral type testing. When we're looking at it from our design of code point of view, rather than the API side of things, then the unit testing side of things for verifying that it does things the way we expect it to, even if it doesn't do things the way the user does. So I think, that is an underlying piece for reliability and functionality, for sure. And then usability, if you're going to the behavioral side of things, then that could kind of fit in there. But I think because we're aiming for the qualities of our API, which is the public edge, that testability isn't necessarily something that a user's going to think about. It's something we're doing as we're building stuff up, absolutely. But I don't know that it fits in this needs for the user. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Cool. I like to rabbit on. So, usability. One of the first things that hopefully we all love are standards. So consistency. There's this, if we've ever played games, computer games, and you run up to a wall that looks a bit funny, and you can smash it, right? The next time you run up to a wall that looks funny, if you try and smash it and it doesn't break like the first time, that lack of consistency, that lack of language consistency is really jarring for us. And the same goes for software. So looking at the style guides, I'm from a PHP background, so the PSRs are where I'm from, but in Python, the PEPs, when we're looking at maybe a slightly more spurious example because no one can agree on it, but the REST type things and so on, looking at those style guides and adhering to those where we can, where they're idiosyncratic to the software that we're putting forward or the type of application we're putting out. Really important there. Because that comfort will help us get on with it, with the usability a bit more. Common attributes, functions, and concepts. What I mean by that is where you've got similar concepts between objects or classes, trying to maintain consistent naming across those, or if you've got a relationship between two things, having that similar kind of relationship between others rather than it being an entirely new way of looking at things each time. Don't reinvent the wheel. Keep that consistent design language as you go through. Consistent naming, again, if every object has a name, every class has a name, or every value object has a name, and it's called name, then when the user encounters a new one, they know to look for name, right? It's pretty simple there, but just keeping that consistent set of concepts and ideas is really powerful there. And one of my bugbears is error codes. How many of us have seen the MySQL error codes, or no 1000 something went wrong, and then you have to go and look that kind of stuff up. Why does it have to be a number anymore, right? So let's use some machine understandable English, and I think I mentioned that a bit further down, but try and keep a language around the error codes in the same way like HTTP has that classification at the front. You know, the first number of the status code gives you a flavor of that. Try and think about the hierarchy of those things and how a human can understand those at the same time as a computer. Patterns, hopefully we all have an idea of what a software pattern is, and if not, that's just because we haven't named them for ourselves yet, but things like factories and observer patterns and all sorts of stuff like that. Where we're putting forward the more code-based APIs, our libraries, using common patterns to interact with your library is really important as well, because that's a common language between all of us. We might write in different languages, we might have different experiences in terms of the industries that we work in, but hopefully we all understand what a factory is. And if you don't know what I'm talking about that right now, I will be very happy to tell you what that is later, because we should all be sharing the knowledge. But effectively, having common patterns and ways of doing things really helps that consistency of language. Here I come back to it. So the REST and RPC side of things, taking those common concepts and continually using them rather than reinvent the wheel. I'm really hammering these points home, aren't I? In the code, the Gang of Four type patterns, anything that's listed by Martin Fowler, that kind of stuff, really quite useful for going through. And again, don't reinvent the wheel. I mentioned earlier about an information hierarchy of or taxonomy of error codes, but it's really helpful if you understand where things exist for a user, where their entry points, where you've got relationships between concepts. You probably, unless you're putting forward an all singing, all dancing graph type thing, you probably want them entering at one layer within that and then jumping down to the relationships from there. So you might want them to come in, first come in via user and then friends. Or that's a really bad example because then it's more users. Come in as a user and then library books that they've taken out. You could go in from library book and then go to everyone who's taken it out, or you can go into user and go to all the library books. But who is your user and which mode would work well for them? I'm really scrabbling at that example, but hopefully that kind of starts to make sense. Nesting things too far. If we're talking about REST APIs, then A/1, B/2, C/3, D/4, you just get lost. In the same way, there used to be this whole thing about not being more than 3 levels deep in a website, not having more than 3 clicks to get depth. That's very subjective, but trying not to overcomplicate that nesting of your entity relations and where things live is really kind of important. If you can rip those out and translate those concepts, or understand exactly where in that network of concepts users want to come in, then ultimately you'll actually have something that's a bit more intuitive for them, because you're meeting them where they're coming from, as opposed to forcing your full view on them, bringing that empathy in, bringing that understanding of what they're going to use you for. Really important. Abstraction. A lot of us are going to be writing CRUD, create, retrieve, update, delete type APIs, and REST, unfortunately, is pretty much all about that if you go real purist. But the power of putting an API is a translation between your user's domain and your domain. It is a way of putting in that layer of saying, here is where they are, here is where I need them to be, how can I provide them a window into my world? And so taking as much of the thought away from that as possible, making things more complex than just, you have to fetch an object and then send it here and then put it over there and then something prints over there. Instead, have a single endpoint that does that kind of thing. Have a single function that does that kind of thing to meet your user stories. You will get more buy-in. You will make your life easier. It'll make the users' lives easier. And why should they have to do all the hard work, right? If you're putting forward something that's powerful and abstracted, it will help everyone down the line. And plus it means you can change anything you like underneath. If you've just provided them that little window through that's really powerful, you can change your database, you can switch to a queuing system underneath, make it all singing, all dancing without them knowing anything underneath. But as soon as you start making a big song and dancing about, you gotta pick this here, throw it in there, take it there, dunk it in the tea there, that kind of stuff, as soon as you change something, you'll change and break their workflow. And then kind of simplicity is that kind of end result there. The more you can abstract away, the more that you can hide stuff behind a curtain and give them only that little view that does exactly what they need. And, you know, sometimes it's only what some small number of people need, but ultimately, the less they see of the inner workings, the less they need to reason about stuff, the simpler everything will become for them. Might be hell on earth for us, but it'll be simpler for them, and they'll use it more. The other thing is, there will be fewer failure paths for the user. You know, the more endpoints you have to track, the more things that could break on that edge, the more work that will be for you to figure it out, and the more frustration they'll have as they go through that. And then the flip side to that is extensibility. The more you abstract, the harder it is to build something new and exciting and creative. So I do have a message about pragmatism in here somewhere, but thinking about how, you know, I'm pretty sure that we've all played with both clients and SDKs, and that level of low level, high level, finding that balance of where one gets used, where you're hitting stuff raw, and another one where it's abstracting on the client side really helps there. I mentioned about not exposing everything, restricting as required. Don't make everything public straight away. Think about the impact of putting something out there. If you put it out there, people will use it. If you give them an endpoint, they'll discover it, they'll use it, and you can't take that back without pissing them off. So thinking about how you allow that extensibility and allow people to build on top of that stuff. And again, patterns will help your users understand how to build stuff on top of things. functionality and reliability. Yes, I do color. I also do a lot of skipping. Testing. You can tell I haven't looked at these slides in days. Using the appropriate testing methodology to underline that functionality and reliability. I mentioned about unit testing being great for us, behavioral being great for our users' point of view. Do we all know what behavioral testing is? I see nods, I see a hand. Sorry?
Not in APIs.
Not in APIs. Okay, well, so when I was at a previous company, we had a lot of APIs that were exposed, but no one ever documented them. And we knew that it needed refactoring underneath because it was horrific and crashing servers and all sorts of things. So in order to document the API at the same and the functionality at the same time as putting in the foundations for us to refactor it, I put in a layer of Gherkin. So if anyone's used Cucumber or Behat in the PHP world, Gherkin's the behavioral descriptive language there, and that allowed me to abstract a lot of stuff for testing to go on top of APIs. So it called APIs underneath and it called things there, but using that behavioral side of things meant that I could step away from the API itself and the documentation of that, such that I could rebuild things without vastly impacting what I thought the functionality was, and I could figure out when I was running stuff against it. So when you're calling web services, it's actually quite useful to build that in, especially if you're producing a technical product and you have a product manager who likes to talk in the English type language, the natural language side of things. So yeah, in that way behavioral works, and it's less brittle in a number of circumstances than implementation testing. Cool.
Have you used any of the fuzzers lately? I haven't tried fuzz testing on my API yet, but I want to. Yeah, security is a big issue, and of course the biggest problem is that I'm not a hacker of any kind, so it's like I can figure out basic ways somebody can attack, but obviously there's millions of ways to attack it. Fuzz testing sounded really interesting to me as an idea of like, oh, here's something that can kind of basically attack it in every way, in a lot of ways I hadn't seen. I don't know. Have you had any experience using fuzzers on anything? I'm curious about it.
I've not used automated fuzzers. I've used fuzzing as a technique, again, in that that under-defined legacy stuff, where I'm throwing random numbers in and making sure that the random numbers coming out made sense. That kind of mutation testing as well is quite useful, especially when you don't know what the parameters, like what the boundaries are for things. So that works well there. Fuzzing can take a lot of time because obviously if you've got a random problem space, you're not necessarily going to pick up stuff all the time, but I think there's a kind of a related discipline, the word's escaping me right, like aspect-oriented testing.
Yeah, some of the tools now, the new LLMs are coming out, they're flexible, but they hit a lot of things.
Yeah,
they're really,
yeah.
They're more than just throwing random numbers at it, making sure it doesn't morph. That's like level 1. Now they're up to levels where they're like, it's surprising like how fast I saw. And that's the thing, sometimes when you see a demo, you don't know if they cooked it to make it look more awesome than it is. But if it's the way, I mean, Google just put a video on, because they got like OSS fuzzer or something, I forget what they call the tool, but they showed it using it. I mean, Google's got a pretty big footprint out there that they have to protect, and so it's...
And they have a lot of compute resources to go with that, so, sorry, yeah?
Yeah, just on the concept of fuzz testing, a while ago I built out something, not necessarily for like APIs, but it was also doing kind of this random testing, and it was before like AI was super, super popular. But the way that I implemented it was I was using like reinforcement learning
Yeah.
on the background, right? So every time you found an error, take that pattern, assign some reward to that, right?
Okay.
Continue to build off of that. So
That's a smart way to do it.
yeah.
Did you do that right out on Python yourself, like from scratch, or?
It was done in Java, yeah,
Java.
from scratch. Yeah.
I mean, that reinforcement stuff is what's underpinning a bunch of the LLM thing. It's just,
So DeepSeek's, they did it with that.
yeah. So, like, it's all the same stuff. They just now have found a way of funneling a lot of money at NVIDIA to do that kind of stuff. But yeah, like, the only downside of that, the fuzzing type stuff is it can take a long time to apply and achieve. And it can be difficult to know if you're going down the right path with it, which hopefully, with a nice, with that reinforcement type learning, you can get better at that, but that's going to have to learn your system, and it will take a bit of time there.
My
But
boss is very concerned about security, so it's just that. I know it's going to take a lot of time. I still think he wants me to do it.
well, if he's going to pay you for it,
Fair enough. True.
learn new things and get paid for it at the same time, right? So yeah, there's that whole kind of like, we have the hierarchy as the pyramid, but the test pyramid. The unit testing for us, the behavioral or integration testing, functional testing for our users, attacking it from both ends, always going to be important because that reliability in particular is on us. The functionality is definitely on the user's experience side of things, but that unit testing side of things is more in our realm. And this is kind of, to make the point about the fuzzing a bit more, putting testing in your, hopefully we're all using CI/CD in what we do, and if not, we plan to do it any day now. And we're definitely getting all the money and time we need from our management to be able to do that. But making the testing part of the build and release process, hopefully we are all bought into such things. But again, finding ways of doing that offline for the fuzzing would be useful. Monitoring live production with live testing where you can. Obviously, you probably don't want to be changing much data in prod unless you can. Get away with it or have a test instance, but finding ways of running synthetics, which is at least what Datadog calls it when they're putting stuff forward, but actually having some results to monitor production, really quite useful where I put this in, I should get this out. Because the worst thing is when we get called up by a customer saying, do you know your stuff's broken? And you have to go, yeah, I know. We don't want to be finding out from them. When we're in the web realm, record replay testing. So it can be tough to simulate production loads or real production use. So if you can record either through your own stuff or through proxies, the requests and responses coming in such that you can replay that against a test environment, that can be really powerful. And hopefully we're all bought into at least some elements of test-driven development, but every time you find an issue, create a test that replicates it and then fix it so that the test passes. And that way, when we keep adding those things to our arsenal, they never come back again. And we get to work on more interesting bugs when they come up, as opposed to the boring one from last week. Mentioned Datadog earlier, but metrics, really important. Less so and a bit harder when we're working with our libraries, but putting forward public APIs, for example, over web services, actually measuring the stuff, performance, knowing that it's slow today versus yesterday, knowing that in a particular circumstance, you hit ON squared performance rather than ON, and so on going forward. So metrics tell you what is happening. Those pretty graphs, charts, showing you the things going on. On the plane today, many people around me were watching The Matrix, and it's a bit like that scene where you don't see the things going by, you see the woman in the red dress. Having these charts there just allow you to to spot these things before your customers do, and that's the most important thing. Recording those status codes with our web stuff, recording success and failure. If there are error codes, recording those against our metrics. Does an error take longer to respond than a success, and so on. Timings. How long does this take to call inside, and then how long does it take for the consumer? And then we can pick up any network latency as we go through. Business logic. Are we hitting the beats of our library, of our application as we go through to meet our goals to put forward there? You probably want to know how many times you issue a new UUID, or how many times the users go through this particular set of if statements. When you've got that there and you can see what's been going on for weeks, you understand what the rhythms of your application are. And if you do some comparison, either by remembering what it looked like last week, or using the time shift type tools in Grafana or Datadog or anything like that, looking at what happened last week compared to this week, you start seeing patterns as you go through. I mean, if any of us have looked at the traffic patterns for a lot of business related websites, we'll see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and we can see when our customers wake up and go to sleep. Really helpful. I mentioned Datadog because I love the thing, but it's quite expensive. Really good UI, but you know, if you're happy to put stuff in, anything doing open telemetry, Prometheus, Graphite and StatsD, even Grafana, Elk type stuff, for Elast alerts, all these things are fun. And hopefully one day you too can be surrounded by big TVs. This was really fun. This is a long time ago, actually. This is at DataSift. We had the Twitter fire hose. And so whenever there was volume shifts on the Twitter fire hose, we could see that in some of our charts. If any of you are soccer fans, there was a World Cup in Brazil in 2014, I think. Germany played Brazil in the semifinal, and Germany won 7-1, right? And one of these charts, we were watching it live, we could see each time there was a German goal, we could see that the Twitter volume spiked like crazy. You could see each goal in that. It's wonderful. When we had an alert, our blue light went off and woke up the ops guys below. And what you don't see is, I think off in the corner we had our developer amnesty zone where you could show up there and talk to the DevOps people. There's also a portal warning sign down here warning you that there was actually up in the roof we had a full-on full-size PC case and PC up there driving a bunch of this stuff. Fun times.
Open telemetry, I've just touched
Yep.
it. So if you want to, like, when you talk about recording business logic, is that what the traces are doing? Or is that something?
No, what I meant by the business logic is, so traces kind of go through all, it's like debug. When you're doing debugging, you can see where it's going through. You can see which systems are being touched and so on. When I was talking about business logic, I meant more, what are our business goals? How many times has this thing happened? Whereas tracing is more, when it came through, what path did it go through and so on. So you compare those together, but I'm talking more like custom metrics, like having very explicit points in which we can say, hey, I want to measure this.
Yeah, it's usually explicitly written part of the code.
Yeah.
Right? Particular counter you want, and you also want the timestamp, and you get the report for the particular type of operation with the timestamp when it started, when it ended. and that actually gives you a much better insight.
Yeah, but we can use tools like Datadog and OpenTel to give us some of that stuff out of the box. But we as developers need to think, what do I want to measure? There's only so much things can do automatically, but actually saying, I need to count this and put that forward. Sorry, you're going to say, sir?
I was just following up. I think you're definitely on the right track. Metrics in general, OpenTel is made up of tracing metrics and logging. Logging, we already know. Metrics is sort of like you were talking about, counting how many things are happening and stuff. How many people are tweeting right at this particular moment and stuff. Whereas tracing, yeah, exactly. It allows you to sort of follow or inspect or check out your business logic in the sense that you're capturing what are the inputs to this function, for example, or what is the state of the application at this time when this function was running, and then what's the output, or if it does go to an error state, you can figure out, is this a code logical problem, is this business, wasn't expecting these inputs, whatever it is. So tracing the most detail of the three, can often be a good replacement for logging because you're not just outputting a feed, you can then filter it out. Just show me all the times this function ran with this particular input or something like that. And so you can do all that stuff, yeah.
And you can aggregate on top of that in this, in terms of saying where over time have I spent the most compute, and understand where the bottlenecks are at the aggregate level. But also being able to drill down on a single call, if you have that through, where you've got it all hooked up through OpenTel or the Datadog unified tagging side of things, then you can compare that with the logs and your other metrics and get like a really nice overview. It's a lot of data and a lot of things to dig into, and that's where
Finding like just enough that you can figure it out without getting flooded.
Yeah, exactly.
It also depends what you want to monitor. For example, if you want to monitor system performance, you do different metrics. If you want to monitor the network traffic and how the gateways are handling it, it's different metrics. And also like pulled connections, for example, to the database and etc. And sometimes nothing works. I mean, I was chasing an issue for 1 week, and it turned out that the problem was we were wanting too many test threads, and the garbage collector was not moving fast enough from Eden space to new generation in a VM, in a Java's VM. That one, there's no metrics you can do that.
Yeah, some of the things you just got to reason about and kind of dig into.
Like
So
a lot of coffee and a lot of advice.
yes. Mentioning logging. So I said that metrics tell you what's happening. Logging helps tell you what happened. That's the kind of way I'm thinking about it. Obviously, you can look back at metrics and get through that, but it's really nice to have that record of what goes through there, helping you debug production faults. It gives you that insight into those running applications. Now, logging, hopefully, we are doing that explicitly for ourselves. There are going to be things that spit logs out, but logging gives us a chance to narrate what our software does. And then where that applies, A, if we're serving up a public API, we can see what that happens. But B, if you're putting a library out and you allow a logger to be injected into it, you can provide those logs to the user straight away. PHP has monolog, Java has Graylog, and yeah, I'm crashing there. All the logs. But yeah, if you can actually provide a way of getting that information out to the user via that kind of narration, always very good. I mentioned a bit earlier about error messages again. Being able to trace your logs through using a trace ID or request ID is actually quite powerful. Humans are reading log messages, so finding ways of exposing that and making that available to them, really important. Information with the users of code. Big bugbear, watch out for log levels. Do we all know what log levels are? Not everything is an info.
I have a quick feedback on that. We just took over a project 2 months ago, and the previous vendor had apparently turned on debug logging, and within the first 3 or 4 weeks, we turned it off and reduced their cloud bill by 70%.
And seeing some of the cloud bills that I have, that can be a lot of money. Yes, so, I mean, there's that, but also, you know, we talked about tracing being a lot of data. When you're having high volume services going through or high volume APIs, having all that noise, it's really hard to pick through. So log levels to categorize the kind of things that we're putting out there and putting into our logs, really important. So think about when you put a log message in, is this something I really need you to know? Or is this something that I only want to see when I really want to know if I really, you know, if you've ever done the kind of debugging I do far too often for professional, which is in PHP, just print here. How often do you want to see that kind of thing? Not very, but that's where debug message and your logs can come in.
So to tie into that, we have added custom rules in our CI/CD pipeline, specifically looking for those types of debug messages and rejecting the build.
Cool.
And it's become very powerful because we have predictable patterns we can see on that. So it'll actually fail the quality control gate. So that's very useful. I also wanted to touch base a little bit on logs from a cybersecurity perspective. Pay attention to your log retention rules. Logs are a treasure trove for bad actors. I can't tell you how much data I've pulled out of logs. I used to be a pen tester, and some of the data you can pull out of logs and just own a system. Never log any information you don't absolutely need to see in a log file, and then delete that log as soon as you don't need it.
I would question the second bit. I understand where you're coming from, but definitely don't put something in there that you wouldn't want someone else to read, because one day someone will read it.
Sorry, I got one more thing.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Don't put stuff in your query parameters unless you have to. Query parameters are logged to your web server log. One of the big violators, credit card numbers in query parameters, account numbers in query parameters, treasure trove of data if you
Absolutely.
web server. So
And if you think about how powerful logs are for good guys, they're that powerful for bad guys.
And debug logs find some very interesting bugs also in the code.
Yeah, absolutely.
Under a different load circumstance that you didn't have before.
Yeah, well, it depends how you're filtering on the log level, but yeah, definitely. Every time you emit a log, it costs. But if you're throwing stuff out at debug or trace, it will slow your software down and find different things in that way. Is that the kind of thing you're? Yeah, definitely. You overwhelm things in different ways. So, it's a bit quantum, really. A system under observation behaves a bit differently than a system that isn't. But yeah, definitely, if you can afford it, Datadog, love the thing. Or if you can afford the time, then Elk, Elastic, Logstash. I like using Kafka for logs, but that's because I like reading from the same stream multiple times and so on. But there we are. Kafka to transmit the logs, not to store them.
Well, I actually have done a major project with Kafka to analyze the blue dumps on the major retailers.
Oh, cool.
And we tried everything that would work. The Kafka was the only one that we actually.
Yeah. No, it's really powerful, really useful.
Greylock to Kafka is a really good pairing too.
Yeah. I like something called Benthos or Red Panda Connect these days, which I can talk about later. That was a different talk that was rejected by this group.
If you understand the zookeeper, it's a really good thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Irish communities.
So, moving on from what is a fascinating thing, and we could have a whole, we just did a whole discussion about another thing that I'm really passionate about in APIs is versioning. especially doing versioning up front. Even if you think it's your only version you're ever going to have, put a versioning system in there. Make sure that your V1 is written in there, because there will be a V2, and you will find that you need to support that going through. When we come to our libraries, we need to think about semver, semantic versioning, and how we increment those versions there. But again, what's the difference between a major and a minor version? What is a breaking change? How long are we going to be supporting that API? When you deal with the much larger enterprises, they're dealing with budgets, and they want to make sure that their investment now will be amortized over a couple of years. They want to know that you're not going to change things or rug pull them on your API tomorrow, such that they've got to rework a bunch of stuff. So when you're putting stuff out there, how long is it going to stay out there? Even if all you say is, well, I'll break it next week, at least setting that expectation for people as you go through, and understanding how, what is a breaking change. We once, at the company we were doing with Twitter, did some other stuff where we were putting stuff out there. We discovered by adding a field to our API response, thinking that's fine, people just ignore it. Typed languages were a bit upset with that. But we found someone was serializing the API response into columns in inserts for a MySQL database. And as soon as we gave them a new field, they just said, new field equals this, and their app crashed. You can't legislate for users. So if you set those expectations up front, what's a breaking change, what isn't, really useful. Feedback when things go wrong, it's just like user interfaces on websites. If something goes wrong, you want to tell someone what went wrong and how they can fix it if they can, rather than just say, oh, it broke. So make sure that you're providing that kind of clear feedback to them as you go through. Say why it went wrong if you're not going to violate anything security or anything sensitive there. Use appropriate language. Don't swear at your customer. I have seen that. Don't do it. And then error codes, I mentioned it earlier, but I really like using dot-separated words in some kind of natural language, but something that is predictable, so it's understandable not only by humans, but also you could have a smaller, a set of codes that could be understood by a translation layer, because how many of us think about translation when it comes to our error messages? Or just something that a computer could pick into and understand. So having that kind of hierarchy thing, providing a glossary of where those things, so our errno 1001 can actually be understood as soon as it comes in. So I'm skipping forward because I realize that we've had a bit of a chat. And we're doing pretty well. But it gets a bit faster from here. So proficiency. Oh.
One of the common things I see with versioning is you create a whole syntax format in your API, and then some customer starts building some whole infrastructure on that. You release it, you break everything on their side. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
They now have to run this previous version from all other customers, because it'll take them another year to catch up. Right? That's one of the most common things I've seen.
We need to, as soon as it goes out there, as soon as you have made something public and published it, we have to assume it's being used. We can figure out if it's being used, but we have to assume it's being used, and therefore we have to preserve that. And that's why it's very important to understand or put forward those expectations about what breaking it means and what breaking it isn't, so that you can lay some of that at a customer. You have to cope with this kind of change. A new field in this response shouldn't be breaking. Cope with it.
That's assuming they're actually reading what you're reading.
Oh yeah, but at that point you can at least lay the blame at their door for not reading the thing that they were given. I know that's a bit blame gamey, but it's a useful thing documenting that stuff up front, because then you're very explicit as to what you feel you can and can't do. Documentation, write it. There is no such thing as self-documenting code. There's code that you can read, and there's code that your friends can read, and there's not always the same code. Yeah, just write documentation about stuff. Keep up to date. It doesn't matter when you write it, so long as it's written. You don't have to write it up front. You don't have to write it there and then, but it needs to be accurate and it needs to be written. We lose a lot of the why when we don't write documentation. You know, you write your software and then you move on, and then you come back a year later and go, who wrote this crap? And then you remember it was you. Instead, throw the documentation in there, really useful. Sorry?
So when is it going to be able to see AI that's specifically for documentation?
Oh,
Perfect candidate for AI is formatted.
Yep.
It's in a text format. And there are some tools you can generate the AI documentation, but it's, you know, it's like for people who don't look inside.
my only concern with AI doing that documentation right now, at least in the general sense, is it might be less accurate than a human writing it. Because it, again...
But if you think about it, it's a perfect candidate. It's formatted.
Not really, because it doesn't, AI doesn't do reasoning, at least not currently. And so
Yeah,
the biggest important in documentation is why did you do the choices you made, AI might spit out something, but it's not actually thinking about it. It's just repeating what other people might think about something similar.
I think
it's a dangerous way to go.
I do think you're definitely right there, just not yet. I think, but that is my opinion.
I think, at least in the current incarnation, AI is a fantastic tool to assist the human to write the documentation. It is not yet at the point where you could put it in your CI/CD pipeline and have it go off and do it unsupervised and expect the output to be valuable.
Trustworthy.
Yeah, definitely not trustworthy. I'm doing a lot of that on my own, and it's not trustworthy. So that's where you get into crews of agents where they double check each other's work, and it's very complicated, but it's not, even with that, it's not, you've got to have a person running the tool and using that as a force multiplier, not as a replacement.
You got to have a human's hand on the pile driver.
Dramatic errors are the ones that have automation.
Yeah, well, the thing with automation is, while it can make our results 10 times bigger or 1,000 times bigger, it can make our errors 1,000 times bigger as well, right?
That's already invented autopilot.
Yeah.
Humans make error, machines don't. So.
Yeah. Yeah, but humans create machines. So yeah, just write as much documentation as you can. It is boring, I know. If you can get some help, great, but check it. Put that forward. Working examples really useful. I'm sure we've all come across examples of software that is either poorly or undocumented, and we've got some good stuff and we've got some bad stuff in our. Think of the joy you'll create in my heart if I stumble across your documentation and it's wonderful. But just putting that care into it shows that you are that receiving type of producer of software that will listen to the users and so on. Cross-linking from the code, really useful for your colleagues. Manuals, quick start guides, cookbooks, anything you can do to kind of fill all that kind of stuff in, really helpful.
Can I add one last thing on documentation?
Of course you can.
Documentation helps you understand your own code and the purposes behind your own code better merely by writing it.
Yes.
Oftentimes, you don't even realize you thought something, you didn't think something through until you write the documentation to describe it or how somebody else is going to use it. Then you go back and you realize, that does not work the way I thought it was going to work.
So I would relate that to rubber ducking. So if you don't know what rubber ducking is, you know, how many times have you gone to a colleague, explained the problem you were having that you couldn't figure out, and before they've opened their mouth to help, you've gone, I get it, thanks. And you wasted their time. Do it to a rubber duck, rubber ducking.
It's
Yeah.
And you can spend extra time working late until your other half is complaining, right? Like, why are you there till 9 or 10 o'clock, right? Trying to finish this thing. You just hit a limit, right? And then the customer says, okay, it's good enough, right? And you get stuck in that bind.
You can definitely get stuck in that bind. Perfect is the enemy of done. But also management needs to take on board that documentation is part of your product. If you're the management, then you got to buck your ideas up. But in general,
I might be in a minority here, but I'm not a big fan of having documentation on the code because number one rule for the documentation has to be absolutely correct. And I find that a much better tool is a Confluence and other places where you can keep the versioning management, etc., than inside the code. And again, it's just a personal choice. You read something on a code, you don't know if it is not updated, not updated, it's correct. Not
yeah, no, that's very true.
and when it was written,
Mhm.
maybe it was changed since it was written. So that's why I prefer Confluence for the documentation than having the literally comment. But it's a personal.
So I personally prefer keeping the documentation with the code where applicable, rather than in Confluence, because you're talking about the code and not necessarily about the wider scheme.
Yeah.
Confluence or a wiki or anything like that is really good for like the wider, but when you're actually talking about your application, I think keeping it closer to hand to the people who are actually going to be working with it, it makes sense there. But certainly, like, I'm in this living documentation kind of concept. Doc blocks, they go out of sync with the code, and that's information generally more for us.
I'll give you an example. You put the number, I created the static constant, put the number up to the static constant instead of number, and I wrote the comment documentation because 9 is a magic number.
Yep.
Okay, so that's kind of I understand because it explains you why you went to the extra step and
Mhm.
using the primitive type. But having like a large amount of documentation is, maybe at the beginning of a class or something, it might make sense. But
I think
just personal choice.
just remember that you are who you're writing the documentation for.
Yeah.
If you're writing it at the code level, you're writing it for colleagues in a lot of cases, unless you're actually doing the documentation for your public API, at which point you're writing it for users. So having that handle on who you're writing the documentation for will help you understand where it lives best and the style of documentation that you go through. I think that's quite useful. So doc blocks, I like them. You don't always have to do them, but I just really like having the comments there and ready to kind of lay that out. IDEs make that a lot less useful in many ways. But then you get people like me who every now and then just drop to Vim because we want to, and we don't have anything fancy in there to deal with doc blocks and jumping around stuff. So it's kind of useful. Using standards that are put forward, great for that there. Annotations and comments, again, within reason, and knowing that they will go out of date. So every time you write them, make sure that they're accurate, at least at that point. I could have done a whole comment or talk about OpenAPI spec. I absolutely love the thing. If you don't quite know what that is, you probably heard of Swagger. And when I was first doing this talk, there were things like RAML and other things like that around, but OAS kind of rules the roost. And I absolutely love when I'm integrating with a new partner and they can either produce that interactive documentation from Swagger based on the OAS spec, or at least give me the OAS spec. It's great to have that laid out in very explicit terms for me to work with and understand that up front. I really love the idea of, in England, there's the Channel Tunnel, which was dug from England to France and from France to England, and they met in the middle. And having that specification up front allows two sides of that provider and consumer to work towards that same goal at the same time, so that when you bring it together, hopefully your integration works flawlessly and you haven't missed each other by a mile. But just having somewhere to start and aim for is kind of really useful there. Oh, I dunked on soap as well. I can't stand the thing.
OpenAPI has a really solid supporting tool called Redocly, if nobody's heard of it. Allows you to split your spec and bundle your spec so you can manage the spec file itself in the necessary components, paths, and schemas. I'm using it heavily in the project I'm on right now. It makes it so much more maintainable than having a 6,000 line OpenAPI spec that every developer is going to make a mistake on, and bundle it all up for everybody else. You can put the bundling in your CI/CD pipeline, bundle up the spec file, and everything. Bob's your uncle. Just it's called Redocly, R-E-D-O-C-L-Y, and I love it. You can take an existing spec file and split it, which will then put it in a components folder with schemas and a paths folder with all your paths and your methods. And then you can independently manage each of those pieces separately. And it also makes for the work pattern so much more simple by doing it that way. And then you make changes, bundle it up, and it bundles it right back into the full spec file you can use for like an AWS API gateway or something like that.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I do that by hand, so I should do it by Redocly. Yeah, and you're enjoying it.
I had a senior architect kind of slap me on the wrist, like, I told you about this before. So I started using it, and it's life-changing. So just if you spend a lot of time in OpenAPI like I do, look up Redocly. It's amazing.
I was I ran a panel last week with, or the week before, sorry, with one of the maintainers of OpenAPI spec, and she mentioned to me a bit of software called Microx, which is an OAS. I think it's an OAS aware proxy, and with that you can validate your API responses from your OpenAPI spec and make sure that stuff's going there. So there's all this stuff makes for a great set of tooling. And then of course, because it's all written in that way, you've got JSON schema can be used in different tooling to do that. You can do automated generation of clients, all sorts.
Yeah, SQL Alchemy and I can't remember the partner library that goes with it. You can also take like Fast API, can read an API spec, generate your entire data models from that spec. SQL Alchemy can then generate your persistence models from that. You can keep them all in sync.
SQL model.
What's that?
SQL model.
No, it starts with an A, and I can't remember what it is. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, I love it. Moving on a bit though, support and community. When you put stuff out there, you can just throw it into the void, but people get a bit upset about that. So finding ways of telling them how to get in touch with you. Everyone's firing up a Discord at the moment. Make a Discord, or use someone else's Discord and let them have the pain of that and just find a little corner of it, or a Slack or anything like that. But making sure that you've got defined ways of people getting in touch with you, really useful. When you put stuff out, certainly as an open source maintainer, you're the support. You are the person who's responsible for that. You need to provide, unless you've made that conscious effort, if you want that kind of buy-in, you need people to be able to ask you questions. Be kind to people, please. If they don't understand, have patience. Invite that feedback. Allow people to say, hey, I've got this problem and I've not been able to solve it with you. Please feed that in. Everyone has their own experience and every experience is valid. it might not be the experience you want them to have, but it's the one they think they've had. And you've got to accept that they've gone through that. So just be gracious when you're picking up stuff like that. Be attentive, try and get back to them and learn, you know? At the end of the day, if you're putting something out there for users to use, you can't just turn around and say, well, you're using it wrong. And you can, but then, you know, if you've ever been on IRC, at least in the old days, well, I still see it on Discord, so it just moves platform, but that whole kind of like, you're doing it wrong, rather than accepting the premise of the question. So
You're talking about people who think that the other person is stupid because he gets a different big O number iteration.
yeah,
That's a huge bug when you see people, you know, Stack Overflow's stories, but that, yeah, somebody asks like, hey, I want to do this, doing it this way, and there'll be like 80 comments of people saying, you should never do it that way. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's not what the guy asked. He asked how to do it, you know? Say, if you think it's wrong, I'm sorry.
answer the question.
Yeah.
Don't answer the question you wish they'd asked.
Yeah. It's so common.
I
It
have 3
happens every-
teenage daughters. It's much easier to deal with them than some of the so
That is not surprising.
let's just keep it there. So keep crying.
So, you know, you're providing customer service. Be nice to people. And you never know. Hopefully, you can kind of. There is an XKCD for everything. You know, the whole thing about you remove a bug. The CPU no longer overheats when you hold down spacebar. Well, someone was heating up their apartment with that. You know, when you make a change, you will have impact on people. If you don't, then the change was pointless anyway. But be prepared for people using your stuff in weird and wonderful ways, and accept that that's what they're doing, and work with them rather than totally reject what they were doing. One of the hardest bits, creativity. Creativity is for users of your APIs is an end goal that is aspirational most of the time. Like, if we want success for our libraries or our services, we have to be building up all those bits of that hierarchy of needs to get to this point where they can be free to put all this stuff together. So putting that flexibility, extensibility in there, having a bit of luck, being nice to people, working with them. I talk about doing improv. Improv is all about yes and. Listen to the idea, accept their thing and go, and we can do this and run with it. Build that in, bid it in, and encourage people. Be nice and say, go get them. Always good. And it will help people build wonderful things on what you do.
Just from the personal experience, you could be hottest guy at the high school, like kind of career event, because every high school kid wants to become a software engineer or whatever, and they're expecting some young hotshot, and then they see you.
What's the best is when you show up looking like me and say, yeah, I'm 28.
I do a lot of career type of thing with the.
I know exactly when the white hair started on my beard, and it was the Tottenham Hotspur website in 2006. I want to say a bit about pragmatism.
Love this example.
I always like this.
Yeah. Some people call these cow lines or desire lines. So, you know, where you've set off the wonderful path, you walk this way. People just want to go over there, so they'll take the easiest route. That's pragmatism. Perfect is the enemy of done. Perfect will have us going around in circles all the time. We're never going to be perfect. If we were perfect, then a lot of us would be out of jobs because we wouldn't be fixing legacy systems and we wouldn't be fixing bugs.
Every piece of software can be infinitely improved. You gotta know where to stop.
Yeah. So let's take a step back and say this is good enough. Or think about when we iterate on things, we got to put something out there to then build upon it. And if you just keep polishing it, it's never going to get out there and you can never test your ideas. it can promote the technical debt if you're doing that. Like, well, it works, but technical debt is something that you can control so long as you're intent on measuring it and controlling it, and you're aware that it's there. But find that balance. If you try and do something pure REST, you're going to be wrapping your head around all sorts of things just to say, okay, so if I want to validate this before it actually gets saved, I'm going to think about this as a transient object that then I post the state of this across here, and then it disappears and it doesn't have it. Just make it work within reason. You don't need to get it perfect. I think we've all had the colleague who said, no, that's a 409, not a 408. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day, so long as we're close enough. I saw that look. And yeah, like I said, iterate. We've got the versioning. We know how to introduce new things to our software. Use that. Put something out, see if it matches the goals, and improve as you go with our feedback and so on. And finally, I just want everyone to take pride. You know, a lot of us are engineers, a lot of us are developers, a lot of us are putting our all into this stuff. And your API is you. You know, it's a public face, it's your avatar. If you don't take pride in it, who else is going to like it, right? Love yourself. And if you can't love yourself, who's going to love you? I've just misquoted RuPaul, whatever.
Have fun, that's the most important.
Yeah, fun, enjoy yourself, put stuff out that you're proud of. And, well, like I said, impress your users with its awesomeness. Just, you know, enjoy it. So, with that, we've had a lot of talk. I've spoken a lot. I feel like I've gone on another 10-hour plane ride. Sir?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. So I have two questions actually. One is, wait, now I forgot my question. Why did you decide to do a presentation about APIs? And the second one is, so I'm helping Ruby and Rails SaaS shops to build their public APIs as a consultant. And a frequent thing we run into is that the SaaS owners, managers, sometimes developers, want to know who is using the API, not like in general, like the persona, the actual account.
Yeah.
Who's using this endpoint or that? Do you have any favorite tool? I know you mentioned like all these tools, Grafana, Datadog, and there are also other ways you can track that. You can save it in your own database and put some metrics to it. This is what we've done in one place. I don't know, do you have any, do you run into this situation ever? Or do you have a preferred way to handle this?
So, I'll answer that question first and then go to the first one. There are plenty of tools out there that hook into APIs that do that kind of metrics on public APIs. So the one I worked with in the past couple of years, the name has totally escaped me, and I'll come about it as soon as I've stopped thinking about it. It just got bang. Yeah. Quite expensive because you're basically just passing them a log stream and then they're presenting Grafana back at you, although they deny that it looks like that. But you get a bunch of different API tools, like I think Kong will do it as well. So there are a few things out there that do that. So you can pull that out. If you are throwing stuff into Elk, then just, if you've got the information there and then, on the user for each endpoint, then just logging that works. I like the idea of, not all the time, you don't always have the user information just like an identifier, not the actual account number or anything like that, just an identifier at the API level, but at some point you've got to work that back to the account. There's nothing stopping you from processing your log messages as they go through your pipeline to allow you to enrich from another party. So when you've got just a user ID to then expand into user stuff there, but that ends up being a chunk of work to do. If you use something like Datadog, then you start running into charging issues on the cardinality of tags to break that stuff down. So if you've got lots of money to burn, cool. But you might be better off using one of those kind of pre-built things or your own to get that full on. Datadog's great at aggregate. It's great at tracing. It's not so great if you need to like have that really fine-grained approach. That's something that your logging platforms are a bit better at, in my experience.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
We're using New Relic and not really for that.
New Relic has its upsides as well. I found, at least a few years ago, that it was a bit constrained when it came to more custom type stuff. I don't know if they've changed that in the past few years, but yeah. Why did I want to talk about APIs? Because I hate working with bad APIs and I want people to think about me, please. I really think that we need to think about our users more than some of us introverts want to, you know. If we can develop empathy for our users, then we can help solve their problems more easily. I had a colleague years ago who would insist that this thing that our big customer was doing was the wrong way of doing things, and no, it's working exactly the way. As soon as you sat them down with the customer and the customer actually explained what they were trying to do, immediate light bulbs, immediate thinking about how we can improve things. Oh, I see why this isn't right for you now. Having that empathy with the user, applying our thinking about users to what we do, will just mean A, that I have a smoother ride when I'm integrating with your product, but B, we can all get on a bit better. I've given this talk in many guises over the past, it's been a decade now. And I haven't changed my enthusiasm for just trying to get it right and trying to put this message out that, you know, just because it's technical, it doesn't mean it has to be hard to use. So anything we can do to improve that and make the life of the guy next to you easier, the better.
That's awesome. Cool. Hopefully it has a ripple effect.
Well, fingers crossed.
Well, Swagger was like a godsend, and my explanation is very simple. Unless you want to talk, consumers of the API 90% of the time are the front-end developers or app developers. In my case, so I always tell people to document with as many comments as you need from the open API application so they can read and understand. Unless you like explaining the same thing to 8 different front-end developers, you better document that thing so they don't have to use it.
Some of us really love the sound of our own voices, but even that's stretching it.
Yeah, APIs.
Yeah.
Well documented APIs.
They're joyous when they work, and they're joyous when you can understand it and you can implement something in a day. And they're horrific when you just don't know where you're going next.
I was just wondering if you had a good story, something that was a very challenging situation, but you really enjoyed it in the end because of what it brought to you.
Challenging situation. I know it's really hard to, when we're talking about integrating with others, before it was called fintech, I did some work with secured loans, where you take a loan out and you secure it against your house, like a second mortgage type thing, but not a mortgage, whatever, like a lien. It is the most frustrating thing dealing with banks, because they all do things differently. They all, at that time, had a different flavor of soap, or not. They all used FTP. And what I've discovered is they still use FTP. It's still about upload a big file. And like, I know about the whole never underestimate the total bandwidth of a station wagon filled with tape, right? I get upload a big file, whatever, but there has to be a better way. But those were horrifically documented systems. And even now, I realize I'm being recorded. There is a certain bank that I am doing some stuff with for a customer, and it's just endless meeting upon meeting upon meeting where good documentation could solve 99% of all of that.
Try working with healthcare.
Sorry?
Try working with healthcare groups.
And just on your point there with banks, I worked with banks earlier in my career. We're, in Las Vegas, big casino town. I don't know if anyone in this room works with any casino tech. But yeah, I mean, we have massive systems, legacy systems that are basically, the nerve center of the casinos, running all the slot operations, all the casino hotel reservations, casino comps, all that stuff. These massive systems, very few of which have any API whatsoever. So in other words, when we talk about FTP and stuff, a lot of, say, marketing, processes are, generate a CSV and upload it via our web interface, as opposed to, here's an API, you can push it all out and send messages. Same with just about everything in that business. It's changing, but very, very slowly.
Yeah, because no one wants to break the moneymaker. That's the thing. So challenger banks are doing well in the UK because they're starting from scratch. But the old banks are really struggling to keep up. They're getting better and they're improving things, and stuff like open banking in Europe anyway is helping there. But there's this terror of dealing with the old stuff. And that lack of documentation, or the very specific way of doing things, is really hamstringing a lot of them. Regulations and COBOL and
regulations and obviously just embeddedness, and also just the lack of really sort of outside people. So many people in this business are there because they've been in it for 20 years, as opposed to bringing in outsiders with different perspectives, different views. This is how we did it at actually technology forward companies, and trying to push ahead. So there's a lot of problems. It's kind of interesting.
The flip of that is, if you bring lots of outside people in with new ideas, and they don't appreciate the old ideas, then you get JavaScript. Sorry, that was a bit of a dig. But you know what I mean. Not JavaScript itself, but let's gonna have another framework and another framework.
Certainly go too far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Best thing about standards is there's so many to choose from.
Yeah, now you got 99.
Specifically for this town, every single one of the online gambling establishments losing money, and they make a lot of money on the land casinos. They lose a lot of money on the casinos. So that's how far they don't understand.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that they're afraid of it is because, and rightfully so, is a brand new, whatever betting, you name the company, and I think on the best year they lost like only 30 million, something like that. So they're resistant to the change just because they think the change is going to cost them.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. I mean, sometimes it does. So.
I wanted to congratulate you on your alertness and all this after your flight. You do that. I think I have to wait till next day.
Lots of coffee. Josh?
So outstanding talk, by the way.
Thank you.
There was a slide in the very beginning, you don't have to go all the way back to it, but the one that was talking about the model inheritance, and it could go, you're saying it could be problematic. Maybe one more back.
Well, I mean, nesting entities can be problematic.
I've worked at some interesting systems in my past too, where it has been very helpful, but then also very problematic. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective, maybe some war stories around that particular bullet point.
If you remember, I put forward a graphs are everywhere talk as well. as something to think about. I really like graphs. I love nodes and vertices and stuff like that, and the connections between stuff. And it's great when you can pick it up on one node and then follow it down, or go, I'm going to pick it up from there, like any kind of. The thing is, if you try and find the perfect way of nesting that in more of a tree thing, you'll end up being, I've got to jump through 20 different hoops just to get to the thing I want. So finding so REST, for example, is inherently going to be digging into things in trees, because of the way we're entering. We're going an ID for this, an ID for this, an ID for this, and digging in. So we generally, unless we're exposing everything, we're generally having to pick exactly where we enter that graph of our interdependencies and our objects. So if you pick the wrong one, then to get to that end thing that's really important for a user, you've got to jump through all those hoops. I don't have like a specific example to go through, but hopefully that kind of idea of, just think how long a path is in a REST API. If you've got to get to the fourth thing deep, it can just get ridiculous. And while we can handle that on the programmatic layer, our ability as humans to think about that starts to become more and more impaired the deeper into that relationship chart we go. So I guess that was more my point, is it's a lot harder for us as humans to reason about that when we get that deep into a hierarchy of things, when we need to relate to other things.
I think you can also get into technical constraints when you have this
Oh, absolutely, if you're going that way, yeah.
4 levels deep, then
Exponential size increases of the object.
Mm-hmm.
I never go more than 2 levels deep in a REST API. At that point, you're not getting relationships on the nested object. You're just getting the nested object. For those very reasons.
And there are different ways of, like the whole graph API concept as well is a different way of doing it. My concerns with the graph API type approach is it puts a lot more focus on the user to understand it than a REST API would, but it does have its advantages in terms of allowing us to.
There is industries where the REST just simply doesn't work.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of work with the IoT devices, which publish enormous amount of data in a short period of time. It just REST doesn't work. It's streaming, and you just have to serve the queries queries as a part of the request, and it's literally streaming. And sometimes it's streaming the whole thing. You just pick up whatever you want to.
And that's exactly where I was going with the pragmatism stuff. Is if we die on the hill of REST, then we're going to die pretty bad.
I remember, when SOAP was predominant, that thing was half broken.
Half broken. And one of my concerns with RPC, remote procedure calls, and SOAP, to my thinking anyway, is an example. You're exposing too much of, you're exposing a function on another computer, basically.
With the wisdom, you just tell them exactly what the mechanism is.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge security hole. But it was the right time in the right place for the market. So everybody now, and then they
and we've moved on, but not everyone has.
Not everyone has. What I'm saying is, everybody knew it was a bad thing. Everybody had issues with that, but
it was good enough.
It's just people needed it, so and they got it.
And if we didn't have that, maybe we wouldn't have REST or graph APIs or anything to build on. As someone said the other day, the reason we have SQL databases is because we used to only have NoSQL databases.
I mean, my first experience with the SOAP was a long time ago. When we were having a meeting with the Verizon people, they said, well, when you get our request, chop off the head. Why are you sending me header if I have to chop it up? He goes like, chop off the header, don't send it back to us. Because our system will crash.
Again, I'm being recorded, so I'll say less about that. Thank you very much. I look like this. If you want to have a chat as well, do hit me up on LinkedIn. C. Hoult, with the U like Nicholas, the actor, who now comes up if you search for my name. So, you know, I'm no relation, but I live near where he's from. Or you can email chris@zarma.co. I'm always open to a chat, regardless of whether I'm going to get paid or not. It's really nice meeting people. So, yeah. And if you're into cybersecurity and you know about MSPs, there's a cybersecurity coming on tomorrow. A conference coming on tomorrow that you can still get tickets for, that I've been helping build out a bunch of tech for at the MGM Grand. So, right a boom. Thank you very much. And thanks for putting up with me talking so quickly. It's great.
Can you recommend a comedy club in Vegas?
I literally landed here 5 hours ago.
I thought you lived here.
Sorry?
They want to know your shows.
No, I've flown here from the UK today.
Okay, so you don't live here.
I don't live here. I'm going to see Ben Schwartz and friends on Saturday, so hang on.
Hopefully it was a direct flight.
Oh, it was, yeah. Yeah, it was direct from London Gatwick.
That was this new one, Northern?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, Norse. Yeah.
Sorry. There we go. We have a 1-year JetBrains license to give away for any IDE. So anyone interested in a 1-year free JetBrains license? Okay, we got you three here? Okay. All right, then we'll raffle it off. So let me hijack the screen.
Yes, I have reset it. Or perhaps one person has no chance.
There, jump rope. Sweet. Yeah, I'll take whatever Chris is having, by the way, because after a flight like that, I'm surprised you have the energy you do.
Lots of coffee.
That might do it. Okay, so I'm going to just give you numbers and then I'll do like a random number generator, okay? So 1, 2, 3, okay? Okay, random.org. Actually, I think I do have a script. Maybe we can use the fandom generator. Let me see if I still have it. Projects. That's not real names. Oh, here, I have a great idea. PHP. And we'll do echo, ran, mt, yep, sorry. Oh, there we go. It's like way off over here, but whatever. Ran mt, 1 to 3. There we go. All right, and drum roll. That is the right. No, hold on. It's just no. There's what's the other one though? Okay, fine. I am using 8.3, so it should be fixed by now, right? And 1. So congratulations. Yeah. It's like stuffed way over here. Sorry. Yeah.
Without going to the casino.
Yeah. And then we also have a 1-month Symfony CAS membership to give away as well. They have Symfony framework and JavaScript tutorials. Anybody interested in that? Symfony CAS membership, going once, going twice. You'll take it? Dimitri? Okay, cool. I'll grab your emails here at the end. Just a couple of things real quick that I wanted to kind of tack on to Christopher's talk. As he was talking, some things kind of came up in my own, thought stream here. Hey, yo, zip. So just 1 second, sorry, right after, okay? So I wanted to bring up a couple of things because there were some interesting discussions that I think can dovetail into some other things here. One of them is we were briefly talking about Behat, right? And I love Behat. I've used it in the past, especially if you're like time constrained and you don't have a lot of time to write unit tests and things like that. This is a great way to at least do end-to-end testing, right? Like feature testing and things like that. So if you have the opportunity, definitely go check it out, like Cucumber, things like that. It's a great way to have like QA write like English-based tests for you. So we had a talk in the past from Adam Englander on this that you may be able to dig up on our YouTube, but I'd have to double check. Maybe that one wasn't recorded. This book here, I actually won this book at Red Village at DEF CON. It's a fantastic book. Somebody was talking about hacking APIs. I think it was you, right? Or like wanting to take a look at it. Yeah, if you are interested in learning more, this is a fantastic book. I read about this. Or if you just want to like just dive head first, there's a tool called Zap that you can kind of like YouTube your way to be dangerous enough to like hack your own website / API and stuff like that. And then we were talking about distributed tracing. Just one thing I wanted to mention about this, where this gets really powerful is just when a user actually is navigating your entire website. So essentially in their session, they get tracked throughout the entire life cycle of them being on your website. It's not just, you can drill down to a single request, but really where this becomes powerful is like New Relic has a great, obviously costs a fortune, but if you want to follow that person all the way through your website, all the API calls they do, that's like probably the hardest thing to do. Metrics and logging are easy, but with like distributed tracing and stuff, that's where it gets a little more complicated. And we were talking about Elk Stack, that's great. Datadog's also great. You can do your own open source, like host it yourself. What I would say about that is maintaining your own infrastructure requires time to keep it upgraded and stuff like that. So sometimes just biting the bullet and paying people is the right way, depending on whether you can or not. And one thing I wanted to mention, this is not, oh wait, this is it, but I don't know why the website, they must have okay, there's like a CFP coming up for it. But anyway, there's APIplatform.com. It's a website that I am on the conference page for some reason. Sorry about that, hang on. This is what I've used quite a bit of different API like tools or frameworks, if you want to call it. API Platform is pretty neat. It's built on top of Symfony. I guess they have a Laravel one now. But it has kind of like a lot of that Swagger stuff built in. So when you're writing your API endpoints, you were talking about doc blocks and dropping nice stuff on top of it. And this kind of stuff will spit out Swagger. And if you've ever written APIs or you've consumed APIs, this is probably something you'll come across if you haven't. So you'll see an input, you've got your HTTP methods, and then you kind of drill down into what it can accept, what your outputs will possibly be. But one of the coolest things is you can hit the try it out button and like send requests and play with APIs. So that's Swagger, that's really cool. Yeah.
How well does this work? I'm kind of passionate about this auto-generating OpenAPI from your code.
Yeah.
It's not a solved problem in the Ruby on Rails space.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's like solved in Fast API. How well is it solved for you guys? Like once you have some custom stuff in there, does it still work well or?
For .NET it works great.
Yeah.
.NET applications.
General OpenAPI works great. Matter of fact, editor.swagger.io, you can paste an OpenAPI spec into, and it will parse it for you and give you this kind of friendly output. So you can see where you've screwed up your spec file because it's not giving you the right example, it's not giving you the right schema, whatever.
It also like spits out a JSON version, so if you got like, if you need something automated that'll like look at it, and you don't want a person to look at it, but you want another system to look at it. The Swagger automatically gives you a JSON file that's got almost all that information that you can take in.
I mean, yeah.
And you generating it from the code.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
Generate the spec from the code?
In Fast API, you just write the code, and then you do something, I don't know, run a script or something, and then it generates you the whole API file, and then you can do it with whatever you want.
Yeah, so the Symfony, there's some Symfony plugins that do that fairly happily.
Okay.
I personally, again, because I'm me, I don't, but yeah, it's done fairly well there. I'm surprised that they haven't done it in Rails.
There probably is. I'd be surprised. Really?
No, we have auto generators, but they're like painful.
Okay.
It's not like fast API. It's really you write the code, actual code. It's not a custom DSL or anything. It's the actual code that powers your API, and that's where they generate it from.
Oh, so these generators aren't TSL. This is off annotations and stuff like that.
Yeah, that.
You still write the code. It doesn't generate anything for you. So you write the code, you put the annotations, it generates this UI for you.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about.
Or you could write the spec and generate the code.
Either
But
way, yeah.
yeah, I don't think there's a DSL type approach, at least in PHP. That would generate both the code and...
No, not about the code. You write the code with Fast API,
Yeah.
Python code, like proper Python code without any annotation stuff like that.
Yeah.
And from
Oh,
this,
from that.
it generates the code. Yeah. And that's kind
The
of
real question is, can you write the API spec, generate the code, and then run the API spec generation on the code it generated and get the same thing back?
Maybe one day.
Translate to Japanese and back into English.
Yeah. But yeah, like somebody just said, underneath that UI is really just a spec that has, all of this listed out. If you've ever worked with API Gateway and AWS or whatever, this should be very familiar to you. But just one thing about the whole, if you throw an API version out there and it will live on almost forever. One thing I've ran into recently is USPS has been trying to deprecate an API for 2 years, and every year when the expiration comes up, they're like, hey, by the way, we're extending it another year. So I'm pretty sure there's some huge company that's using this that doesn't want to change their code. Again, back to large companies that move at the pace of molasses. But I just found that funny when I heard once you put a version out there, that's it. And then, yeah, I'll hook you up with the JetBrains license. I think that's pretty much it. As far as next month's talk, Devin, do you remember if somebody talked about wanting to talk for March? I don't recall either. I know I volunteered you about the Meshtastic thing, but I don't know if you're anywhere. I mean, maybe we do lightning talks if you can pull that off by next month. Maybe we do 2 or 3 talks or something like that.
Maybe.
What are your thoughts about that?
Give me some time, I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Right.
Does anybody have a talk that they would like to either hear about or speak about that has come to top of mind?
Not by next month, but I can get.
No, even if it's later this year or something like that. In fact, we have somebody from Facebook wanting to do a talk about computer vision and stuff sometime in April, May. So I'm going to grab a bunch of my cards and some stickers here. I'm going to put them up here at the chair. If you can't think of anything now, but then a week later you're like, this would be a great talk, we can definitely just email me. My email's on the card, and you can get in touch with me that way. What's up?
I'd like to hear about OS development or networking protocols.
OS development, networking protocols. I'm not good at either of those. Is the problem. So I couldn't do that talk. But if somebody else has networking or OS development is very specific, by the way. It's a very small niche. So I doubt anybody in this room, unless somebody has experience with kernel development or anything.
The only news that I know in the network protocol was last 5-10 years has been MQTT, which is used for the machine, IoT device communications. But HTTP and networking hasn't changed since the inception of this one. There's plenty of materials. There's no shortage.
Yeah, what's up?
I'd be interested in the comparison between web views and native mobile apps.
Web views and native mobile apps. That does remind me, somebody was going to talk about mobile development. I got to dig up who was talking about that, because we did have somebody that wanted to do like a mobile development talk, and that would be a great addition to it. I feel like, if I can remember who they are. Okay, all right. Well, yeah.
I can't find someone who can actually convince me. Why should I learn the flutter?
All right. Thanks again, Chris, for coming out and doing the talk. I mean, that was awesome. Thanks to Corporate Co-working Space for having us. Again, if you need to reach out to them, you can reach out to Tony. Just feel free to email me. I can hook you up with Tony's information, and you can reach out. Thanks again, Ryan, for recording this. And congratulations to our winners. And we will see you again in March. Thanks.